welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have Dr. Swasti Rao. She's a geopolitics expert, commentator, and author, currently consulting editor and strategic affairs for India's leading media house, The Print, and non-resident fellow at Eastern Circles, Paris. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rao. We'll be discussing today the revitalized Quad, what that looks like under the Trump administration. But before we get into that, just tell us a little bit about what Eastern Circles is, what your work focuses on lately, and then we'll get into the basics of what the Quad is to introduce us to those in our audience who are not familiar with it.
Oh, well, let me thank you for having me on this wonderful discussion. And it's a pleasure to join you, Irina. Yes, I have been working on security and strategic affairs for quite a long time now. I was earlier affiliated to India's Ministry of Defense think tank, where I specialized on European security and the security of the Indo-Pacific theater. And now, of course, I am a consulting editor, and I'm also an academic and a non-resident fellow at Eastern Circles, as you mentioned. So yes, security and strategic affairs are something which is very close to my heart. And in that regard, what we are seeing today in terms of how the India-US ties are progressing is something which is, I think, deserves a lot of attention. And we do see that there has been a lot of strategic attention being given to a whole variety of factors. Perhaps Quad is something where, honestly, if you want to have my opinion on it, Quad is something on which we have the least number of differences, okay? So when it comes to the quadrilateral security dialogue or the Quad, I see a very seamless kind of a continuity from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. That is not where the problem really lies. Mm-hmm. Yes, I do expect the Quad to get more teeth, perhaps, under Donald Trump. But we will have to see how that plays out. That's on the one hand. There are other situations and other issues that have garnered a lot of attention in India because they have not been so easy to negotiate. And in the world of Donald Trump, he has one lens to look at with everything, which is tariffs and trade balance. And since India enjoys a trade surplus with the United States because of a very robust trade in goods and services. So our total trade is close to $200 billion. And where we enjoy a trade surplus, Donald Trump has been very, very clear, unequivocal in asking India to do something about that. So that is one issue where we've been facing certain issues, but I'm happy that we have handled it well because, like I said, that today the US is India's most important strategic partner. So India has already made concessions there. We have agreed to reduce tariffs. We have also agreed to reduce the trade deficit on the US side by agreeing to buy more hydrocarbons from the US. And we have also agreed to now buy more defense equipment. And if you remember the famous presser that Donald Trump had held after the meeting, the bilateral meeting, he made it clear that he's going to be selling billions of worth of defense equipment to India. So I think those are issues that are taken care of. We still have to see how they will evolve. There will be very soon talks around the FTA. Donald Trump is expected to come to India for the Quad summit in September. Mm-hmm. And then we will again try to have some more robust announcements around the FTA. So that's one part. But there were other parts as well, okay, which was to do with the defense, trade itself, where India has been facing certain delays of engine supplies from the US's side. But I think that should be put on the fast track as well. And since this is just an introductory remark, Irina, I think it makes sense to understand that India and the US have had a deeper institutional progression of their bilateral ties in the last 1 decade. And what you see in court is one of the most visible forms of how the collective security is envisioned in the vast theater of Indo-Pacific, where, frankly, India has been one of the most conservative countries when it comes to calling out China, because India has followed a policy of China agnosticism, that we do not take the name of China. And we will see how that plays out. But for sure, as my concluding remark, I would say that Quad is one area where I see a seamless transition from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, and even a bit more impetus to develop, some more teeth when it comes to ascertaining the security order, free and open Indo-Pacific, etc. So those, I think, are my reflections.
Do you see that there is a Trump doctrine about the Indo-Pacific that is
Yeah.
categorically different from the Biden administration? And it's the Biden administration that was responsible for the creation of Quad that could put a different focus on the way this relationship plays out.
So very quickly, I mean, see, the Biden administration, when you ask it from India's perspective, I mean, from India's perspective, we always have had a relative ease in talking to Republican administration, because Republican administrations are more, I would say, conducive to the fact that India does not like to be lectured on human rights, India does not like to be lectured on democracy, etc. Whereas the Democrats have been more insistent on the fact that there will be human rights reports and minority reports and all of that, so they have to also appease some their own lobbies back home, and those have been a lot of times perceived as difficulties in communication. However, when it comes to court, I think we should not forget that even if the Biden, I think this perception exists, Irina, because the Biden administration was extremely supportive of Ukraine, even though their support did not really help Ukraine get anywhere, but it just allowed Ukraine to just, go on fighting for 3 years. But I think the perception stems from the fact that back then, when the Biden administration was formulating its policies, of course, it had a lot of focus on the Quad. If you remember the IPMTA, which is the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Initiative, that had come out during the times of the Biden administration itself. Okay, and that has been, in my opinion, one of the most, I would say, one of the biggest changes in how the four countries are looking at providing some kind of a security architecture in this maritime space. So I don't think that Biden administration was in any way not serious about Quad, but I think the perception comes because Biden administration was also supporting Ukraine, and there were a lot of critics to that. For example, writers and authors like Elbridge Colby, who have been arguing for America to focus single-mindedly on China and China's unilateral rise and the unilateral attempts at changing the status quo in the South China Sea and the larger Indo-Pacific. And I think their argument has been that America should withdraw their security assistance from Europe and focus single-mindedly on the Indo-Pacific. Now that the Trump administration is in power, and people like Elbridge Colby, or for example, Vance, the Vice President Vance, and so on and so forth, there are quite a few out there who also champion the idea that America should be focused on one theater, on the Indo-Pacific. I do not know how that plays out, because Elon Musk is known to have a sweet spot and a kind of a likeness towards China. He wants to invest and all that. He looks at China as a major trading partner. Donald Trump himself has been giving very, very mixed signals when it comes to China. And for once, we have to be patient with Donald Trump, because I don't think he should be taken literally, but I think he should be taken seriously. So if going by his statements are concerned, he has literally thrown the entire world in a tizzy. He has not only been keeping his allies, his rivals destabilized, which you would expect from anybody, but he's also keeping his allies destabilized. I mean, look at the entire breakdown of what is happening between the collective West, on America on the one hand and Europe on the other hand. If Donald Trump is trying to focus on China, then he obviously cannot be cozying up to China and Russia. And on the other hand, also talking about not going for the or cracking down on efforts of de-dollarization and the BRICS grouping. So I think the Donald Trump first few weeks, first few months in office are replete with a lot of populist statements. Many of those are not true. Many of those do not reflect the long-term visions of even what the MAGA group or Donald Trump administration stands for. And I would say that, yes, he is serious about the court, like I said, but we will have to wait and watch, be patient on how his policy towards China actually unfolds, because yes, he wants to manage China better. He's cozying up. He's all the time saying nice things about China, about President Xi Jinping, and he has all the bad things to say about Europe and Zelensky and everything. So I think let's just take him seriously that he has an intent. But I don't, and I'm not even going, Irina, I'm not even so far, I've not even touched upon the crazy statements that he has made for the Middle East, for Gaza, for example. So, cutting a long story short, what I want to somewhere convey is that we will have to exercise a lot of strategic restraint and a lot of strategic patience. There is a grand bargain going on. All countries, especially countries like India that are middle order countries, will try and get the best deal for themselves, which is classic consequential hedging. And I think that's what international relations is all about. But now just circling it back to Quad, I do think that Quad will see progression and development under Donald Trump after all this initial debris will settle.
I want to circle back to a couple of specific things that you mentioned and a couple of specific steps that are going on and that people are paying less attention to because of the big, loud things happening on the surface. Which is the first issue is the issue of tariffs, and you correctly mentioned that Trump views everything, including, by the way, the defense policy through the issue of tariffs. And we have seen some of it in his first term, when even when confronting and challenging China, Trump did it through the lens of tariffs rather than through the lens of sanctions and national security. He did sign off on congressional sanctions related to China, but in terms of his executive policy, it was very much focused on the economic side of things. And I my sense is he sometimes uses tariffs as political rather than an economic tool or as a threat, and sometimes even his supporters do not necessarily make a distinctions between tariffs, sanctions, and export-import controls. But the way it's playing out now is that I'm seeing that while he has officially imposed tariffs on China, he has also, in terms of rhetoric and even policy, has been reaching out to China on issues like removing mentions to Taiwan independence from the State Department, such as removing references to the PRC and calling China China by the State Department. And language matters, just as whether you call the body of water Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico matters, and certainly matters to Mexico. So how do you read this dual policy, this separation between economics aspect of the tensions with China on the one hand, and this linguistic shift that may be seen as accommodating the one China policy that Beijing has pursued for many decades and has been actually at the helm of tensions between the US and China in recent years?
No, so that's what I mean. That's what I'm trying to say is that if you go by the rhetoric that was generated before Donald Trump became president, if you go by his presidential election rhetoric, if you go by a lot of his supporters that have been forcing him to focus on Indo-Pacific, etc., whether it's Professor John Mearsheimer or, like I said, authors like Elbridge Colby, and if you also look at the kind of people that he has chosen for his cabinet, if you look at, for example, Marco Rubio or Mike Waltz, I mean, they are known to be China hawks. Okay, so I think the long term, I'm not referring to the short term, because short term does seem like I've called it the theater of the absurd. That's how it is looking right now. But I think in the long term, the geopolitical rivalry between the US and China is here to stay. There is little evidence to suggest, I mean, as far as evidence is concerned, apart from, of course, the fact that Trump has only put I think about something like 10% or some tariff to China, has not really been very harsh on China yet. I think somewhere he's trying to just test waters and like you mentioned that, I mean, let's just first discuss China and then come to others. On the other hand, why do you think he wants to buy Greenland? I mean, if China is not a problem, Irina, because the entire logic behind America's interest in Greenland is exactly what, I mean, it is a contradiction of sorts in so many ways. America's foreign policy has been not about its continental borders. It has always been about having a forward posture for its maritime borders, right? The maritime frontiers. And that is the reason why America maintains this wide network of allies and bases all over the world, because it gives them access to ensure that it has a forward posture in the maritime domain. Now, looking at Greenland, Denmark is already a part of NATO. If you want to argue that Donald Trump is wanting to end all wars, then why would he want to start another war in Greenland? That's the first contradiction. Second contradiction, Irina, is that Donald Trump's argument is that the Arctic has become very vulnerable because of China's overtures and Russia's and China's joint overtures out there. And he has to be there in order to protect America's interests. But there is already a base there. But he's not happy with just that base. He wants to, to buy it and then perhaps use it as a bulwark against the Chinese, the growing Chinese and the Russian bonhomie, so to say, in the Arctic region. What does it? This is the second contradiction, right? Because if he's so cozying up to China, then why is he doing that in that theater? Because the major theater for the US-China rivalry to unfold happens to be the Indo-Pacific only. Indo-Pacific is the region where, right now the sea lanes of communications are vulnerable. It's not just in the South China Sea part, but it's also in the Western Indian Ocean, what is happening in the Red Sea, etc. And you do see, I have argued earlier that Donald Trump 1.0 is going to be different from Donald Trump 2.0, not because Trump has changed. I think Trump has become even more confident of his style of politics because it has delivered to him. Okay. It's not because Trump has changed. It's because the world has changed. In the first term of Donald Trump, it made sense for him to try and negotiate the Abraham Accords to push for more normalization in the West Asian region between Israel and UAE on the one hand, and Israel and Saudi Arabia, etc. on the other hand. And from India's perspective, it was very important because that was the basis from which quadrilaterals like I2U2 and the IMEC corridor were coming out. So, but there was no COVID. Trump had not really seen the bad effects of recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. He had not seen the Russia-Ukraine war, neither this breaking down of the Abraham Accords. So the kind of world that Donald Trump is inheriting in 2025 is remarkably different from the kind of world that he saw in 2016, for example. And that also puts certain constraints on how the American foreign policy is going to evolve. I would rather let these things to settle down. I would not take his statements on Greenland literally. I don't think he wants to start another war. It is absolutely outrageous. It is an outrageous statement that he would really attack or annex or invade Greenland. I don't think that is on the cards. But yes, I think he does see that Greenlanders also had some appetite for conducting their own referendum. And I think he was playing on that. That's the one part. Similarly, when it is about Canada or Mexico, I don't think it was just about the tariffs, right? It was about basically getting America a better deal from the free trade agreement that they already have. It was about deportation of illegal migrants. It's been a mix of all of this, right? But yes, I think in the first couple of months, what he wishes to show to his MAGA support base back home, that he means what he says. And that is the reason why you see a flurry of executive orders after executive orders. Half of those do not even stand in the court of law. They do not mean anything. But he has still been signing one after the other, one after the other. I think maybe 100, 200, I don't know how many executive orders did he sign on the first day of becoming the president and ending of naturalized, birthright, those kind of citizenship. He's just been on a roll, and he, I think, is very, very serious about showing his support base that he's not all faff, he's not all, hot air. He can deliver on this. But the point is that I still don't think he has a plan. Okay, he doesn't have a plan for the Middle East. I don't think he has a plan. All this talk of actually converting Gaza into a Riviera and all, I think it's quite unconvincing, and it's quite unacceptable even to countries, the bigger countries of the region like Saudi Arabia, that are major partners to the US. That's one. I don't think his rant about Greenland is going to materialize into American, special forces going there, or an invasion or an annexation of in any way. I don't think that when he is speaking to, I mean, he has always been threatening that he's going to be leaving the NATO, but he can't really leave the NATO. Okay, he's not really done anything in that regard. So he has been using, just to cut a long story short, he has been using a combination of these different kind of tactics. There's tariff there, there's threatening there, there's instability there, instability there, and there's so he is just keeping everybody extremely destabilized. I think the first thing that he will have to deliver is the governor elections that are coming up in the US soon. And I think he has an intention, he has always projected himself as this alpha deal maker. I don't think it has been good news for his allies at all. But even for China, I mean, look at China. China is simply keeping quiet. And if I read one of the pieces correctly, they did say that they have to basically wait for the storm to go, the storm called Donald Trump. Okay. So it's better to go with the flow. Yeah, I mean, I'm just concluding. It's better to go with the flow. Like I said, that this is going to be a grand bargain, and we will see how the countries are going to hedge their bets. But I would rather not take his statements literally, because there are so many internal contradictions in the kind of cabinet he's put together, the kind of statements he's given earlier, the kind of statements he's giving now, the kind of institutional frameworks that are there with the US. I mean, all of that is a bit of a fuzzy scenario right now.
Put aside what he has been saying and take a look at what he has been doing. And there are two concrete incidents that I'd like to draw attention to. One is a major naval exercise, which included US and Russia and China and India, Australia, and other naval forces. And there's been there's been this major drill that involves China and Quad drilling together for the first time in a long time in that particular combination. The other issue is in the Middle East, where US has continued the Biden policy of pressuring UAE over AI, and where Biden forced UAE companies to cut tie with one Chinese partnership. The new Trump administration actually went further and pushed them to cut ties not only with all Chinese AI partners, but also with Edge, which is another group that is less familiar to some of the Americans, but is basically like BRICS with cheese. BRICS has been, in my opinion, a little bit overcovered in the media, and Edge has been undercovered as far as I see. So these are two interesting developments, because on the one hand you have this tougher line on technology continuity, which, despite Trump's statements elsewhere, very much is in line with the previous administration's position on denying China access, dominance in the Middle East and dominance to technology, but again focused only on UAE and not the rest of the region, which in itself is very interesting. And on the other hand, you have these naval drills, and what does that signal to you? That he is bringing together adversarial naval forces for this major exercise.
Where did you, by the way, I just want to ask you, where did you see the naval drills between US and Russia and China?
1 second. That came from 1 second. Komodo 2025 exercise.
Which exercise?
Komodo, Komogo.
Komodo exercise
Yes.
2025.
What is all that about? And I've heard this grouping, this name before, but it hasn't been as much highlighted as some of the other major international naval drills that the U.S. Defense policy usually covers.
No, but I think one has to be careful in these statements, Evina, because the Komodo exercise is an exercise which is conducted by the Indonesian Navy chief. Okay, and
So it's
this
not
is
a
by
U.S.
definition.
organized,
No, no.
no, but and it is something that's been going for a while, and U.S. general tends to participate. It's not a
Yeah,
new.
but then what you have to be careful in seeing whether the US, see, I'll give you an example. So there are a lot of exercises that India also holds. So Indian Air Force and Indian Navy also hold a lot of such multilateral exercises. And we invite all our partners and India, because India follows our open multi-aligned foreign policy.
Mhm,
Therefore, India invites Iran, India invites
mhm,
Russia, and India invites the US and Western partners. But if you really see in the schedules of the exercises, the naval assets are doing these exercises separately. Okay, so it's not the same as saying that Trump has
mhm.
started these exercises. No,
Sure.
the Komodo exercises are Indonesian Navy Chief of Staff exercises. And this is not the first time it is happening. I think this is already the fourth or the fifth time this
Mhm,
is happening. And this is taken care, I mean, this is participated by 38 countries, and about 20 kind of different warships are going to be participating in it. And by definition, this is about these are not war games. Okay, so they're not all exercises are war gaming exercises. Okay,
mhm.
so these exercises are natural disaster mitigation and humanitarian
Mm.
assistance and disaster relief.
So
Okay,
they're basically non-political humanitarian
no, and they
efforts.
are joint maritime threats in a non-war fighting scenario. So I think this needs to be really brought out, because
Mhm,
this does not reflect any shift, or this does not reflect any real change in the American policy towards China or Russia. That has been my argument, and that is why I
mhm.
was a bit surprised also, because even
Well,
though he has
mhm,
giving statements, but he has, I mean, his mixed statements on so many issues. But as far as the real thing on the ground is concerned, for example, even in Europe, I mean, I have not seen so far that he has announced any military cutting off of military aid to Ukraine, or withdrawing any key American postures from Poland or from Baltics. He's been threatening. He's been threatening all the time, but no, he's not done it. And I think that is the reason why I have been a little conservative in my assessment of Donald Trump. And long term in convergence on Indo-Pacific, long term convergence on making sure that China's rise in the world does not lead to more disruption. I mean, I think that is going to continue, because, when China came out with the DeepSeek, okay, it was around a day before that Donald Trump had announced about $500 billion worth of investment in the American AI policy. Similarly, if you look at the semiconductor policy, the Biden administration had taken a very strong view of the CHIPS Act, right? And
mhm,
as a result of the CHIPS Act, they had been trying to friendshore the supply and production of complex semiconductors, excuse me, to partners with whom they have trustworthy relations. And if you go into the details of that, the Trump administration has already put about 3 rounds of very serious sanctions, on Russia. Sorry, on China. And
mhm,
China has also put retaliatory sanctions, on the US.
mhm,
This is just about export controls and stuff like that. But what I mean to say is that I have not seen any change in
mhm.
Donald Trump's position on it. Okay. So what I'm saying is that Donald Trump is destabilizing, but I do not know, if you ask me an answer on where this is going, I would say I frankly do not know where this is going, because I do not get the evidence to actually tell me that it is going to be in this direction or a different direction. But I know that there is a lot of chaos around it. However, I have not seen that things have been changing fundamentally. Part of this argument, when I see in Europe, could be that Donald Trump, had it not been for somebody like Donald Trump, I don't think Europe would ever wake up to the fact that they need to invest more into their own security. And now they're doing it in a panic mode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So nobody could have believed that Germany is going to commit 2% of its GDP to NATO. And Germany has been an outlier when it comes to meeting its commitment to NATO for decades, not 1 or 2 years. So what I'm saying is that we will have to see how this plays out. But particularly from India's perspective, yes, we are also careful. What happens? There is a broader rapprochement between US and China, even for the short term. So I think the only answer that I can give, and a convincing answer that I have for that, is that India would like to pursue its ties with US separately. Today, US is the most important strategic partner for India, not only because of China. I mean, that's the strategic defense security convergence, but also because of the 5 million Indian origin people that live in the US, the kind of remittances that we get from the US, the entire issue of the bilateral trade that I just told you about, how the defense ties have catapulted in the last 10 years. It's unbelievable, in many ways. So how the American side has been forthcoming in putting together so many institutional frameworks that allow for not only a buying and selling of weapons, but also setting up of co-production facilities, so that America and India could jointly produce equipment and then sell it to third parties. By the way, even before Donald Trump took office, America is the destination of more than 50% of India's defense exports. And these are not like full advanced platforms, but these are like, more to do with equipment, like, basic equipment or secondary equipment. But that's where it is. I mean, in Europe, it's France that is the biggest destination of India's defense exports. Otherwise in the world, it's the US. So you do see that there are extremely important verticals, and each one of those verticals is really sort of reinforced by a lot of political will on the both sides. Like, for example, on trade and investment, we already have a trade of about $200 billion. And now they have signed on something called a Mission 500, which means that in another 5 years, we can reach the bilateral trade of $500 billion. But America's insistence is that it has to be fair. So you can't really free ride. Okay, so similarly, I mean, like I said, that you should expect more development, maybe perhaps some kind of a negotiation announcement on how are we looking at the bilateral trade agreement. I told you about that. Okay, so and we are expecting something more around September when he comes to India. So, I mean, the fact that US today is extremely important for India's interest in Indian diaspora and India's technological needs, etc., is very obvious. The point is, what is the China factor? My assessment is that in the long term, this is going to play out the way we all believe, we all think, we all predicted. But in the short term, yes, India must try and also somewhere ready itself in case there is a tactical rapprochement. And you already see that, by the way, Irina. There are already a lot of, I would say, signals that India is trying to take in things in its own hands. I mean, in trying to manage the China factor better. India has no interest in irking or provoking China. India has been trying to manage the China factor as well. Look at what happened during in last year, late last year, when we tried to have some tactical disengagement on the LAC, which is the border that India and China share, which is disputed, and it's been the site of many bloody exchanges between our two sides. So that happened. Then earlier this year, today, we saw that high-level meetings had happened, and we also resumed direct flights to China, which had basically not happened after the 2020 incident at Galpan. So India is not doing it because suddenly we have developed a liking for China, or we have started to trust China. I mean, the strategic trust with China is still very, very low. Okay, it's broken. In fact, why should I call it low? Let me say it's broken. Okay, but we are readying for a scenario that in case there is a US-China rapprochement, at least during the Donald Trump years, so we are not sort of caught by surprise and caught on the wrong foot, and we have our own independent, management. So I think this will unfold, and India is also being very pragmatic on this entire question. We do not know if Trump's cozying up to China is simply to drive a wedge between Russia and China so that he can bring the war to you on in Ukraine to an end. One doesn't know. So we are also just keeping our options open. And if you notice that diplomatically, India has said nothing on the situation. Nothing.
It's probably
We just don't.
the wise thing to do under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Frankly, I wish more people said less.
Yes, I know. That's
Um,
right.
but I have a question about the Indo-Pacific security theater
Yeah.
beyond China. Because we
Yeah.
have seen India expand its naval capabilities and it's projecting its power in the Pacific far beyond simply defensive anti-China maneuvers. And we are seeing India also came through significantly during the period of time of Somali pirate attacks and Houthi attacks on
Yeah.
different ships, with particularly with rescue operations, but also with projecting its own naval presence. For now, the Houthis froze their operations due to the ceasefire in Gaza, but given that they have attacked, they had sometimes launched attacks even without Gaza. There's no telling what will happen in the future. How do you see India and also India, US, and Quad coming into that side of things that is less focused on China as the one big threat, and the smaller but potent threats such as trade disruption, piracy, and other kind of non-state actor attacks in the area?
So very quickly, see, when it comes to maritime security, right? When it comes to the maritime domain, if there is one power with whom we really have robust mechanisms, cooperation, a trust factor, reliability factor, it's basically France. Okay, and France, why? Because France is a resident power in the Indo-Pacific. France has permanent presence in the Indo-Pacific, even though the deployments are nothing to match America's deployments. But France has EEZ. France has 1.5 million citizens in the Indo-Pacific. And India and France share a very old, historic, again, trustworthy relationship, which goes back many, many decades. Because both these countries have been operating in strategic autonomy and they have tried to sort of, manage the differences that the world is throwing at them, etc. But when it comes to the US, when it comes to the EU, when it comes to other forces, now you asked me a specific thing about the Red Sea. I'll just give you a bit of an understanding, and so that even those that are listening to us will understand better. Is that see, India is when it comes to the great power rivalry, and when we say the great power rivalry, which has become pretty much the hallmark of our times, it is the China versus the US. The US is the undisputed power, but China is trying to catch up. Okay, and the region, I mean, China is trying to catch up in many many departments, but in the maritime domain, it is very much visible because of the vital importance of the sea lanes of communication or the trade routes, the maritime trade routes. So, protecting the maritime trade routes, protecting Taiwan, protecting the fact that China should not take Taiwan by force, those kind of things have become very important to the US. And I mean, of course, we can, again, you can ask me a counter question or, oh, what Donald Trump may be thinking about that. But if we set that aside, this has been the theme. Now, traditionally, India has been wary of taking sides when it comes to India-China rivalry. I'm sorry. India has been wary of taking sides when it comes to the US-China rivalry. India would like to project itself as a third way forward. That is the reason why Indian overtures, if it is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, if it is whatever, there are so many instruments we have for our maritime security. They are always talking about a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. We are not really against anybody, etc. And one of the reasons why India has been very, very hesitant to join the Combined Maritime Forces, the CMF, which is US-led, okay, has been because of this thing, because India does not want to go and join the club of becoming some kind of an ally, of the US, because US-led CMF operations are also very, very hawkish. They are very much pronounced against China, etc. And India has been very wary of that. India has avoided that. However, this has changed because in November 2023, which is almost 1.5 years ago, this was a sea change. I would say this was a paradigm shift in India-US relations because India joined the combined maritime forces. Now, of course, India has its own reasons to join. India is not joining it because it wants to become a treaty ally of the US, or India wants to sort of go and start bombing the Houthis or bombing, somebody else like that along with UK. I mean, it's not like that. But India has its own reasons because Pakistan is there too. And the kind of security challenges that have started to emerge, frankly, one cannot do without the US because neither the European Union nor countries, individual member countries, they do not have the capabilities to do it. If they also want to control the Houthis, for example, let's say the Houthis, menace. Now, when the Houthi menace started, India thought that we probably could get a better deal because India had great ties with Iran as well. Okay, India has very good ties with Iran. So when the spillover came to the Red Sea of this Israel and Gaza problem, then Israel and Hamas problem, then our foreign affairs minister made a quick trip to Iran, and I don't. That was not really out in the public domain though. But the point was that we also wanted some kind of guarantees, explicit, implicit, whatever, from the Houthis to not attack our ships because they were attacking everybody's ships except for Chinese and Russian ships. And in fact, in January of 2024, if I'm not wrong, the Houthi leader came out in public giving explicit guarantees to Russian and Chinese ships that we are not going to touch you, but we are going to touch you. We are going to basically destroy and target everybody else. And as a result, what did the US and its allies do? The US started with a very offensive operation, especially the US-UK. It was a combined operation, between US and UK. They started bombing the Houthis, and a lot of mess then started happening. But I'm coming back to India. India could not get the same kind of guarantees. India had to reroute every single of its merchant vessel around the Cape of Good Hope, which led to a 200% increase in logistics, in shipping, in insurance, and it basically made international shipping and maritime shipping very, very expensive for India. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the reality that we have today. That even though we would not like to take sides, we would not like to bomb somebody, we would like to stay far from these conflicts, but our interests are suffering. And for that, I think India's joining the US-led CMF, it is a change. It is a big change in India-US maritime vision ties because so far, India has only been comfortable with countries like France or the EU, by the way, who talk about a third way, who talk about we have to lessen the great power rivalry. We have to look for a way out. We don't have to force the countries in the region to take a side. So I think this is also a good example of just how pragmatic, fluid world order sort of makes so many countries, is that the countries are just very, very aggressively hedging their bets. So on the one hand, India still has a posture of a free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. India still has a posture of trying to uphold no animosity against anybody and trying to manage China and trying to, in case there is a US-China rapprochement. But on the other hand, India has also joined the US-led combined, maritime forces. And in many ways, Irina, if you want to understand carefully, I mean, this is something which becomes difficult to give a rational explanation about, apart from the fact that India thinks that it is in India's interest to keep its conversation open with all kinds of actors. And I think, in my opinion, this is a very, very good sign that India is not shying away. India is able to put a finger on where its maritime interests, where its defense interests, where its economic interests are lying, and showing the resilience when there is need to show the resilience. Okay, so we were very, very pragmatic in buying cheap Russian oil, refining it and selling it back to Europe because they needed it from anywhere. They said, okay, you buy it from us. So Europe kept buying India's oil that we were importing from Russia. On the other hand, we are very clear that we do not know what kind of dependence that Russia and China have, especially Russia has on China because of the last 3 years of war. And I have argued, Irina, several times that Russia, from India's perspective, Russia-Ukraine war is not about 20% of Ukrainian land. Okay, with due regards to the Ukrainians and their fights, of course, I have a lot of admiration for their bravery, a lot of admiration. I go to Ukraine very often to basically understand the war. But from India's perspective, it is not about 20% of Ukrainian land. From India's perspective, it is this unfortunate dynamic of India's best friend, that was Russia, getting more and more pushed with China, which is India's biggest arch rival. And as a result, India has not placed a single new defense order with Russia after the war has begun. All the deliveries that you see happening, there have been some stealth frigates that have come to India from Russia lately. There have also been some other things, but all of those are deliveries against orders which were placed in 2016, 17, 18. India has not placed a new order, like a big order with Russia. So India needs to diversify away. The Russia-Ukraine war has created conditions because of which India has been accelerating its diversification. Frankly, we are looking today, the three most important defense industry relationships that India has. Of course, one with France, which is very obvious. France and India share a very deep defense relationship. The second is the US, and then there is Israel. So these three countries are where the bulk of India's defense equipment is coming and will come in the future. On the contrary, with Russia, we have dependence for hardware, military hardware that belonged to the Soviet era. And we will need some time to phase that out so that we get into the new weapons. But what I'm trying to say is that basically, to my mind, all these seemingly contradictory things that you see, that okay, India is not taking a position on the war, but at the same time diversifying away and joining the CMF, but at the same time, when it comes to Indo-Pacific region, and when it comes to Quad, doesn't want to see why is it so unconvincing? Because on the one hand, we have joined the CMF, but on the other hand, we are not even wanting to take the name of China. We don't want to name China when it comes to Quad. Okay. So these contradictions, in my opinion, are basically India's way of managing a very uncertain world and trying to make sure that we are open to all kinds of conversations, all kinds of time, without relying too much on one particular, because we do not have a security alliance with anybody. We don't have a NATO. We are not a NATO member. We don't have security treaties like Japan and South Korea and Australia and New Zealand have with the US. Okay, we are not a part of AUKUS. Right? Mm-hmm. We're not a part of the GCAP program. So India is pretty much on its own. And as a result, India is almost all the time consequentially hedging its bets to get the maximum out of, this very, very fluid world order. So, that's my original point anyway. Yeah.
How do you see the increased US purchases, defense purchases, impact India's interoperability with Western forces, and how do you see it impacting its general defense direction?
So very quickly, of course, India's defense equipment has largely been Soviet era, and after Soviet Union, it was basically Russia. And this defense dependence goes back many, many decades. It's about 60, 70 years old, okay? So it's not easy. India is not a very rich country, even though it is a rising global force today in the world, but it is not a very rich country. And India's defense needs are massive. India is the world's largest defense importer. Okay, so what the government has been trying to do is that the government has been trying to create an ecosystem where we transition from a buyer-seller mindset to a co-production mindset. Okay, so we are asking our partners to come and co-produce with us. We've had some examples of this. In the form of, the Sukhoi Mk-30 aircraft that we have licensed production from Russia. So the knockdown kits are coming from Russia. We assemble those in India. Similarly, from the BrahMos missiles that we have now also jointly sold to Philippines, and now we are talking about Vietnam, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that it's there on the one hand, but as far as interoperability is concerned, as far as the number of exercises that India has started doing. So you mentioned Quad, the core countries are also doing a very important war gaming exercise called the Malabar exercises. And the Malabar exercises are actually very potent war exercise. Not every single multilateral exercise is a war gaming exercise, okay?
Mhm.
But Malabar exercise is a war gaming exercise. And in Malabar, the navies of these four countries, India, USA, Japan, and Australia, get together and create these war gaming scenarios and test their interoperability. So also, if you look at just how many, the rising number of Western equipment that India wishes to buy, even though India doesn't have sometimes the money for it, that also shows if you look at the engine development program that we have right now, the engine development program we are not able to do by ourselves. We are reliant on some foreign partner. It is either US or France or UK that has to offer us, more technology and help if you want to really develop our first indigenous aircraft engine for which is about 100 kilonewton thrust. So whether it's that, whether it's the missiles, whether it's the radars, the base technology a lot of times is coming from the West, and India is adapting, because India doesn't do reverse engineering like China. We don't do that, okay? And we are reliant on imports, but at the same time, we are trying to create an ecosystem where our defense procurement is not reliant on a single source, but is diversified as much as possible. And therein, you see that there has been a meteoric rise of certain Western countries. France, I don't give as an example, because India-France ties are anyway very, very strong. So France being an important partner to India, it's a well-known fact. It's been there for the last many, many decades, and it's still going steady. So India and France have signed a defense industrial agreement. But the special thing about these three new defense partners that I talked about, France, Israel, and the US, is that the defense industry cooperation with these three countries, when from India's perspective, is also complemented by a very strong cooperation on technological innovation. And that is what kind of sets these apart from just any defense partner, because of course we have good ties with Spain, we have good defense ties with Germany now. One of India's biggest submarines actually are being built by the Germans. But it is not the same as saying that those relationships and the relationships that India has developed with France, US, and Israel can be put in the same league, because in these three, there is a very massive, deep technological innovation, which is on semiconductors, which is on AI, which is on a lot of this role of AI in autonomous systems, etc., etc. So things are very qualitatively different here. You don't see any such thing when it comes to India-Russia ties, because Russia is not a technological power.
Mhm.
So this is what India's procurement system is looking like. And like I said, interoperability per se is not really that kind of a problem. I don't know what you mean when you have interoperability in mind, because India does have the air defense systems, the S-400s, and some people are not able to understand why India operates Rafales and Mirages, and perhaps now we might just also sometime in the near future start to buying of F-35s, because Donald Trump talked about it. But the thing is that for those it's not really a technological challenge. We can develop a different kind of data linking, and that works, because we have been operating the Sukhoi Mk-30s alongside the Mirages and the Rafales, and we already have two squadrons. I mean, two units of the S-400s. We are still waiting. We have 3 units of the S-400s. Actually, we're waiting for another 2. So it's not an ideal situation, but it is not an impossible situation. So I think a lot of people do not have clarity on that.
I mean, it's very obvious that the American air defense systems and even the Israeli, which are basically co-produced with the US, are very expensive.
Yeah.
But they are also technically better than S-400s. It's just a practical issue that's been a matter of testing. So the question is, do you see a potential middle ground? For instance, developing your own air defense systems or cooperating with some other power to create something that's somewhere in between the S-400s and the Patriot / Iron Dome / THAAD type that's medium priced, for instance.
Very quickly, Irina, see, the thing is that India has to have a 3 or 4 layer air defense system. So it's not just the S-400s. We also have our own indigenous, air defenses like the Akash. We have some of We also have the short, like the short range air defenses. So we have that. See, India's quest for defense procurement, defense modernization is a very long story.
Mm.
Okay. What I can tell you is that we are trying very hard to not allow for lapses, not allow for deals where we become vulnerable to Chinese technology into our systems. We are very careful of that. In fact, the Ministry of Defense in September 2024, last year, came out with an advisory and said that India has to make sure that we cleanse our defense equipment of Chinese tech. Now, it cannot be done 100% because China is controlling a lot of these supply chains and production chains. So, but then I think the buck stops where you're talking about, sensitive technology, when you're talking about sensitive systems. So, and that is the reason that I do not foresee that India is going to have another big ticket defense purchase announcement with Russia. Of course, we are still waiting for the two S-400s, and they are not able to come because they have not been able to come because of the war in Ukraine and the pressure on the Russian military-industrial complex. But again, those deals were struck in 2018, and that was a different era because Donald Trump administration, or was it the Biden? It was the Biden administration. It was the Donald Trump administration. I'm sorry, Donald Trump administration. We were successful in not getting sanctioned for that. Okay, but if we go on buying more and more of America's, American defense equipment, and especially keeping in mind the fact that we have frameworks like the SOSA, the Security of Supplies Act, we have now IndusX Innovation, framework, we have the ISET, which is critical and emerging technology understanding and all that initiative on that. I mean, with all of that, there will be an implicit understanding that India will have to then have fewer defense relations with Russia, because ultimately this is also about business and this is also about, all of that. So right now, we are not in that situation right away. Right away, our defense forces, a lot of those squadron strength, especially for our air force, are critically low. We are looking at procurement. We are looking at Make in India. We are trying to just do it ASAP and wherever we get it from. But even for our other platforms, excuse me, we are looking at, first of all, trying to reduce the power differential, which is increasing with China. Okay. And in that regard, the only set of partners that we have seem to be Western partners right now, because Russia is really stretched. It's overstretched because of its war in Ukraine, and also really pushed with China. So we are just holding our horses there. So all the older technical military hardware, military hardware is going to come from Russia for very obvious reasons because we use so many of them. But the plan has always been to modernize and to phase them out. Okay, and for that we need the Western partners or Make in India. So we can't do it alone. So we want the partners to come and invest in India so that we are able to transition from the buyer-seller, ecosystem to a builder's ecosystem, and then perhaps also start exporting. I gave you some answers to that. So long and short of it is that yes, India's defense needs very much guide India's strategic partnerships. It's a fact, and one of the reasons why the US has emerged as such an important strategic partner is because today the US caters a lot to India's defense needs.
Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't at the end touch on the elephant in the room. China's growing role in Pakistan and the fact that the
Yeah.
dependence between Pakistan and China at this point, in my opinion, is unbreakable for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future, at least. The sheer amount of debt that Pakistan has towards China, I don't see being repaid anytime soon. And at the same time, Pakistan is becoming an area of assorted economic corridors for various international parties, just as India's venture into IMEC has been challenged by the security considerations in the Red Sea. So the question is, where does it leave India with its defense relations? Pakistan doesn't have great relationship with the US for the time being, but it is trying to push itself into a relationship with Israel, potentially to compromise these defense supply chains. Based on my view of these things, Israelis maybe a little bit more naive or more pragmatic about it, depending on how you look at it. But as far as I see, there is only one good reason for Pakistan to pursue that relationship, and that is to disrupt, and to try to get purchases of Israel defense. They are already succeeding with cyber software, and to disrupt. To have an impact on Israel's defense exports to India. Uh, do you see other members of the Quad stepping up to the plate in that regard? Can South Korea become sort of a counter to this Chinese influence? Can Japan become more interested in that side of Indo-Pacific issues beyond naval anti-China coalition? Or do you see India continuing to be relatively on its own with regards to this China-Pakistan coalition and everything that comes from it?
So very quickly, the China factor in the neighborhood, in India's neighborhood, is something that we watch and observe very, very carefully. You mentioned Pakistan. There's also the evolving situation in Bangladesh, which is very, very
Mhm.
uh, problematic to
Yeah.
us, because China today is the biggest defense supplier to both Pakistan and to Bangladesh.
Mhm.
Okay. So about 87% of Bangladeshi weapons are coming from China. Similarly, around 90% of Chinese weapons, Pakistani weapons are coming from China. Okay. So China has promised Pakistan, submarines and fighter aircraft and whatnot. So this is a problem, but it is not just, Irina, the problem between Pakistan, about Pakistan and Bangladesh. It is the stated policy of the Communist Party of China to contain India's regional aspiration. It
Mhm.
is, it is a stated policy. So one has to understand it's not just about the border dispute that we have. The fact that we have a border dispute just makes it worse. But let's imagine a hypothetical scenario that tomorrow there is no border dispute between India and China. Can they become one? Of course not, because there is a feeling of competition.
Mhm.
China wants to project itself as the leader of the global south. India says, no, you are not a developing country. We are the real voice of the global south, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
right? So and today in India's neighborhood, apart from a very small mountainous country called Bhutan, Himalayan country called Bhutan, every single of India's neighbors has signed up for the BRI project.
Mhm.
So China has been investing very strategically around key ports. So whether it's Chittagong in Bangladesh, or whether it's Hambantota in Sri Lanka, whether it's Gwadar in Pakistan, it's been an encircling. We feel it, we see that. It's a stated goal of the CCP to contain the rise of China. I want to say something important about this, which will clarify the concept to a great degree. See, India talks about a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia. Okay. But China, on the one hand, it talks about a multipolar world, but it talks about a unipolar Asia. And unipolar Asia that China champions, which is led by China, versus a multipolar Asia, which is championed by India, where India is also a pole and which remains inclusive. They do not reconcile easily. And the sad part is that now, if you see the Russian statements on the Indo Pacific, they are very much mimicking the Chinese style. They call it Asia Pacific,
Mhm.
even though they do not want to be very open about what they're saying. But frankly, Russia's utterances on Asia Pacific, that we refer to as Indo Pacific, are becoming more and more similar to China's. It is a concern for us. But so that's the one part, that in India's neighborhood, China has been playing a role. If there is a power vacuum, China comes and usurps that power vacuum. China also comes with deep pockets. China makes these countries sign up for loans, and these are extremely opaque conditions. And then, all of that uh, economic statecraft and that aggressive economic statecraft of China. Whether Japan or these countries can step up, you see, Japan obviously has a problem with China, which is that they have a dispute over the Senkaku Islands. Okay,
Mhm.
Japan has an open dispute. Japan is in, the Quad, also because of China somewhere. And now, if you see how the European theater and the Indo-Pacific theaters are getting connected because of what North Korea has been doing in for Russia. I mean, they've been going and fighting on the behalf of Russia. That also complicates, the entire scenario. So Japan stepping in, Japan is already there, but as far as destabilizing impacts in the western part of Indian Ocean is concerned, I think Japan there would like to go in a multilateral way and not in a unilateral way. I think Japan would like to be more focused on the eastern part of the Indo-Pacific, which is closer to Japan. It is about the Straits. It is about Southeast Asia. It is about South Asia, and especially the Bay of Bengal region. Those are the theaters where Japan is more directly looking at. But despite that, let me give you some facts that Japan is very much interested in developing, more ties with the Middle Eastern countries, with
Mm-hmm.
with the European countries. I mean, Japan and the EU have the biggest free trade agreement on earth, and Japan is also developing the GCAP, the sixth generation fighter aircraft program with Italy and UK. Okay, so it's the Quad is one part. Then there is also AUKUS, which is US, UK, and Australia. Then there is the GCAP program. So there's a whole, see, Indo-Pacific by definition is a very different theater from the Euro-Atlantic theater. There is no NATO in the Indo-Pacific. Quad is not an Asian NATO. That's Chinese disinformation. Quad is not just there to contain China. Quad is also there to do a lot of positive work. But I do feel that under Donald Trump, it will get some more teeth, something more concrete. And in my opinion, one of the most concrete things that Quad has done that I mentioned in the earlier part of my conversation with you was the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Initiative. Because if you are looking at a maritime theater, you have to have tools with which you can ensure some kind of maritime security architecture, for which you need the maritime domain awareness. So India has something called an IFC-IOR, which is a fusion center for maritime information, but it's open source. What we are trying to do through the framework of Quad is to develop some more a deeper interlinking of collecting and processing and refining the maritime intelligence or information. And it is very easy. It's easier said than done. It's not. It's very there are a lot of technical complications out there. But I think those are things which are important and which will have an implication for how the court takes things forward.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very, very thought-provoking, and I've learned a great deal, and I think so will many of us, many in the audience, and I hope we will continue this discussion in the future as the situation develops. I think there'll be many interesting substantive developments beyond the rhetoric and the noise, and definitely point out to many strategic issues that should be closely followed, and there's going to be a lot more in the years to come. And thank you once again for joining us, for everyone watching
My
the
pleasure.
program. The Washington.
My pleasure. My
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. And for everyone watching the Washington Outside the Report on Coalition Radio, we'll be back next Tuesday to 9 p.m. In the evening. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Namaskar.